Hello from Denver, as usual. And just get myself in order here. And as usual, I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to share this on my personal page. And then we'll dive right into today's topic, which I think is fascinating and was prompted by a discussion on Reddit I was in this past week about how to keep teams motivated, what really motivates us. So this will be an interesting, somewhat counterintuitive set of information. And as always, I would love to hear your take on this topic, and whether it's during the live video or comments afterwards or just reaching out to me. Okay, I'm going to share this right now. And then I'm all yours. Okay, that should do it. Yes, okay. And in case you don't know who I am, my name is Aymii, and I am a cultural innovator. So I help go in and I help companies and I help individuals better understand their cultures and what helps motivate people, what creates better productivity, less turnover. So it's not even just a matter of we want to make people happy. This is good business. It keeps your bottom line where it should be, and helps keep your longer term vision in your sights, and really helps people develop and grow in ways that promote good problem solving, that promote great teamwork, that promote innovation. So all of these concepts I'll be talking about, and this month's theme in particular is rewards and motivation. But generally speaking, all these concepts have some interplay in creating healthy cultures. And as I mentioned, the general theme this month is rewards and motivation. And last week, we did touch on some of the concepts behind this. So for example, we talked about, I'm just going to adjust the camera here for 1 second. Sorry for this interruption. I sometimes struggle a little bit with the tripod angle there. Hopefully that's a little better. Okay, so last week we did talk about some of the general concepts around motivation. So I'm going to hit on those very quickly just to have those terms fresh in your mind, just to remind you of those concepts. All of these things that we're talking about assume and require that basic needs are met first. So you have to have a salary that keeps the lights on, pays the rent, and keeps you clothed, and all those kind of very basic functional needs in life. The absence of that salary is going to be very distracting and won't allow for people to function at their highest level. The presence of that helps, the primary purpose that it serves in terms of motivation is it helps take people's mind off of money and basic needs and allows them to focus and take joy from their work. So that's why it's so important to have those basic salary requirements met for an individual. The other thing we touched on briefly was different types of motivators. So that could be intrinsic, genuine enjoyment in your work and personal growth and achievement. Those are the things that boost satisfaction and performance. And we also talked about extrinsic a little bit, things like money, status, and bonuses and rewards generally. The two words I want to make sure that are on your mind as well are heuristic and algorithmic tasks. I'm going to start with algorithmic. Those are actually tasks that we're not going to be talking a lot about today. I did mention them last week. Those are the repetitive tasks. You do the same process over and over to get something done. The heuristic tasks, which is mostly what we focus on in this context, are the problem solving, the more higher level tasks that are needed in most companies these days. So that's not to say there's never any algorithmic tasks. Generally those can be motivated fairly simple carrot stick kind of motivators. But the heuristic tasks, which are the elevated, more complex problem solving that generally requires working with other people, working in teams, are really what we mostly will focus on for these types of motivators. The three human psychological needs that we think about when we're talking about intrinsic motivation are competence, and last week I mentioned it as mastery. So mastery might be what you're striving for in the long term, but competence is really a day-to-day feeling of I'm pretty good at this. I enjoy doing it because I can accomplish it. I'm competent at it. I am recognized for being able to do this task. Autonomy. This I'm going to talk about a lot, not just today, but in this series about this month's theme about rewards and motivation. Autonomy does not mean that you are isolated, individualistic, I'm going to go it alone. It means acting with choice. So while you are autonomous, you can still be very interconnected with your community, your coworkers, so on and so forth. The third one is relatedness or purpose. So understanding why it is that you're doing what you do and the impact it has on others around you, the impact it has on the world, and less about the actual specific outcome and more about being recognized for the way you go about doing things, your efforts. So those are kind of the general concepts that we'll be touching on as we talk about the different kinds of motivators. Why is this topic so important? And why is it a little bit counterintuitive? Well, we often think about rewards when it comes for motivation. It comes time to talk about motivation. Bonuses and end of project, whatever it may be, vacations, parties. The problem is generally when people use rewards to motivate, that's actually when they're the most demotivating. Even if you were already excited to work on something and fascinated by the topic or the technology or the task ahead of you, by somebody attaching a monetary value, an if you do this, you'll get $10,000. If you hit this deadline, you'll get a trip to Hawaii. You'll get on the presidents. A lot of companies have the presidents clubs. By having that goal in place from the get-go, it takes away the autonomy. It takes away the intrinsic motivation. Now, whether you wanted it or not, you are being judged and held to a standard that has to do with your outcome, and that is somebody else's idea of the value that should be placed on this work. So truly, when a reward is put in place at the beginning of a carrot type reward is put in place at the beginning as a tool for motivation, it's possibly the worst way to approach this need for highly sophisticated, for problem solving, for heuristic tasks. So keep that in mind. When we use rewards to motivate, that's generally when they're the most demotivating. The other negative to this is those if-then type rewards typically become more and more expensive. We talked about this last week. They become almost addictive. Like you get, your first bonus was a couple $100, and fast forward 5-6 years for it to be meaningful in the same manner, now it's $5,000. And this is something that I think companies often trip themselves up with, is by putting these reward structures in place as people progress through their careers and have higher levels of titles in the company. There's kind of this even subconscious association that the bonuses and the rewards and the carrots at the end of the stick should be larger and should be more significant. So by initially going into a reward structure with that if-then type reward, if you do this, then you get that, you're signing yourself up at the beginning for an ever-increasing expense as people progress through the company and take on more responsibility. Okay, so what is how should this work? What is a good thing to do? What will make people happy and motivated and all that wonderful stuff? If you think about our default state as humans, I'm going to take you back to your childhood here. What fun would psychology be if we didn't talk about our childhoods at some point? When we enter this world, we are not passive and inert and just kind of sitting and waiting for somebody to come tell us stuff and, oh, I wonder, oh, excuse me, I think I'm going to have to sneeze. Oh. Oh my goodness. Okay, staring into this bright light. We're generally curious and we are engaged, and we don't even know about the concept of extrinsic goals. We're playful. We are autonomous and self-determined and curious. So that's our default state, being actively curious and wanting to get involved and engaged with things and figure it out. And for those of you who are my Letterkenny fans out there, figure it out. Yeah. So that's how we come into this world, and that is something that the typical idea of management tends to forget. There's this underlying assumption in most managerial approaches and structures that people don't want to work, and would avoid it if they could. And honestly, that's just not true if you're in the right environment. So think of your own companies and think of companies you've worked at before. How much of the management in those situations revolved around supervision, if-then rewards? If you do this, then you'll get that. Or other forms of control. How much of those management techniques and structures and HR structures and review structures and punching time clocks and so on and so forth operate on the underlying assumption that people don't want to work, and that the goal, the motivators that the companies need to put in place are around getting you to work. Even the idea, which sounds all progressive, of empowerment, I find that word fascinating because it presumes that still, underneath it all, the organization holds the power, and that they are benevolently saying, we are empowering you to work flex time. So yes, maybe you were in a little fenced in 8 to 5 and now they're broadening the fence and you can work bigger, in a bigger range of hours, but there's still this message that the company owns you, that they are choosing to empower you, they are choosing to bestow this on you, and that it could be taken away at any time. So there's this sort of weird dynamic that even when things sound a little bit more progressive, the words we choose to use in typical management structures still have this connotation to them. So these are not great ways to manage us as humans who come out of the womb curious and engaged and happy. I mean, think about when you were a kid and you figured out how something worked, and it's the joy of understanding the world a little better, or the joy of contributing something to the world or creating something new that drives us to continue to explore. Think about some of the early explorers in the world and sailing across oceans. There might have been some financial benefit to them, but this idea of going out and experiencing the world and being engaged with it and connecting with other humans is far more powerful than any financial driver innately within us. There are studies that have been done that when people are autonomous, self-determined, and connected to one another, they will lead richer lives and perform at their highest levels. So taking an interest in your work, if you've created the right culture, and we'll talk in just a moment about some of those actual pieces you can put in place to create this culture, it should be as natural as playing with the world, discovering why things, creating new, discovering why. And in these types of environments, people will actually seek out more responsibility because they're enjoying uncovering new things and discovering new things about themselves. So inherent satisfaction will always outperform extrinsic motivators in the long run. And we did talk about this a little bit last week, because if you focus too much on near-term goals like quarterly results and tying rewards to delivery, yes, you might get some very specific short-term achievements, but if you're really trying to grow a healthy culture and a healthy company, that's not sustainable. So what does work? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's a concept called ROWE, R-O-W-E, results-oriented work environment. Creating this type of work environment, keeping these ideas in mind, allow people to focus on their work and not whether someone is judging them for leaving at 3 p.m. to go to a soccer game or something. So when everybody is on board with the fact that what matters is your focus, as opposed to what hours you're there, as opposed to how you're getting it done, when you're really focused on that, that encourages people to take pride in the craftsmanship. When you do not tie meeting goals to compensation, that helps people stay in the focus on the long-term mastery and quality of what they're doing. And the kind of underlying, as I mentioned, about empowerment and such, taking away even the words human resources and seeing them, seeing all of us as human beings with lives that are complicated and intertwined with our work lives. That is the type of environment that ROWE stands for, or should stand for, results-oriented work environment. That's just one acronym I want to put out there in case you want to research it further. So appropriate rewards in this type of environment that drive high levels of creativity help people provide context for what they're doing. So having lunch with a CEO or a manager, getting praise from somebody specifically from outside your group, so you realize, geez, my efforts aren't just seen by my day-to-day coworkers. And that type of praise is very important, because it should be not so much on your output, but wow, we can really see the effort that went into this and the thinking behind it and the strategy, and it's great the way you were able to pull in resources as you needed them from other departments and collaborate with people who brought a new perspective. So complementing the way that someone works and the strategy they use are far more important than, great job, the client's going to be happy with this. These rewards should not be set up front if you achieve. These should be genuine and heartfelt, and if they are delivered at the end without being expected going into it, it's much more memorable. I talked a little bit at the beginning about autonomy, so let's tie that into how would you take that meaningful intrinsic motivator and create rewards around it. Well, some companies have done this, and they've been very successful. Atlassian, Google's another one. Let them work on anything they want, periodically. Whether that's one day a quarter, one day a week, whatever's right for your environment. But it can't be working on their day-to-day job. It can't be fixing bugs in the code. It might be creating something new. It might be learning a new tool. It might be going into another department. I've always been curious about graphic design. Maybe I can go collaborate on something with a graphic designer and see and play with a different tool. So there should be some sandbox on a regular basis for people to play in and collaborate in that's not their day-to-day operations. So that's one idea. And some amazing things have come out of allowing people to play periodically. 3M did or does, I think they still do, does this. Post-it notes were a direct result of people being able to play at work. Many of Google's, what started out as Google Lab products that have been rolled into their mainstream products, Gmail, came out of this playtime. So you can see that when you really let people have autonomy and go after something that incites their curiosity and that playful, childlike, exploratory nature, that what comes out of it is it can be beautiful, can be exciting, can be new. And this is not to say that the company can still own these, and it's good for your bottom line. So you're not giving up control of the output, but you're allowing people to play within this sandbox during their work time. That can be a pretty special feeling, and it gets them connected with folks who they wouldn't necessarily normally work with. So it can also create a better, tighter team environment, culture in that way, interpersonal culture amongst your organization as well. Excuse me. So when you're thinking about creating autonomy-based rewards, you want to give people freedom over what they can do, when they do it, how they do it, and whom they work with. So those are 4 components that designing a culture and designing rewards around autonomy should take into consideration. Another element I mentioned was purpose, relationship, purpose-based, knowing why your work is important. Those types of rewards look like being valued, especially for your thinking and your method and your effort. Having your name in a company newsletter. Another company had a fancy potato, a golden potato, that the coworkers would award to somebody who really did something special that week or month, whatever. And so people would see I think it was like a Mr. Potato Head doll, spray painted gold, and whoever had the golden potato, as you walked by, you would probably stop and say, hey, what'd you do to end up with the golden potato this week? Doesn't have any monetary value, but it does provide an item to talk about for interpersonal communications. What's up with the potato? It's an easy entree into a discussion with someone. And just shows that they were appreciated by their coworkers and they did something special. And another way would be to call them out in a meeting if you're having especially a larger meeting, and just say, we want to take a minute to let all of you know what Joe Schmo did this week, and we think it's really cool how he went about accomplishing this. Even just having somebody that they don't normally interact with have a thoughtful, meaningful conversation, especially if it can be a superior, an executive level, sit down for 10-15 minutes and say, hey, can you talk me through how you did this? We are really impressed with how your team delivered and how you worked together, and I'd love to hear more about this experience and what made it work. And just having that conversation can go so far, whether it's a phone call and even better in person. And finally, well, 2 more. One is allowing that person then greater and greater opportunities to contribute in meaningful ways. So if you have teams that they could be on, if they can influence policies, if they can contribute to the corporate culture, maybe go be a mentor for others. So giving that individual pride in their ability to help influence the culture of the company and the output of the company and the decisions of the company, that feels very powerful and like you're really being seen and recognized. The last one, I think this is one of my favorites because it's kind of interesting and not something you might think of as an obvious reward, but being introduced to a person that you might not normally interact with. So, geez, you did so great on this project. I really want you to meet our executive director of graphic design because I think with him as a resource, you two need to know each other, and this could really lead to some cool collaboration. Not only being recognized for what you did, but saying, I loved it so much that I trust you and I value you, that I want to connect you with other influencers in the industry, in the organization, whatever the sphere is that's appropriate. That is a really cool way to reward and motivate people and keep people connected. And then if you can add a personal, and hey, Jim really likes car racing too, you two have that in common, the more you can do to upfront facilitate the connection and make it a comfortable experience for both people, the more it really will stand out and be extremely meaningful in motivating and keeping people engaged in what they're doing. So those are some few examples of autonomy-based rewards, purpose, relationship-based rewards The last thing is a team building type exercise that incorporates a number of these items into it. A company that I know of had a sort of a retreat or an all-company meeting and they wanted to do a team building exercise. Well, I just think this turned out so cool. There were 6 teams, and they all showed up, and there were a bunch of covered boxes, covered with a tablecloth type thing. So these 6 teams stood in front of their boxes, and they said, you're going to have 20 minutes to do the task hidden in the box. Ready, set, go, everybody take off the sheet. And all these teams were comprised of people from different departments, people who didn't normally work together. They uncovered this, and it turns out it was a bicycle in a box. So something like from Walmart or Target. We're not talking a huge, expensive team building exercise here. And as they uncovered it, the coordinator said, and when you build this bicycle, it's going to be donated to needy children and needy families to give them a form of play and transportation, so that you can't just don't do a crappy job on this, because this is going to be very meaningful to someone. So you can see you have purpose right there. You have shared purpose. You understand why you're doing this. And then you have a little bit of a recognition of process, because you only have 20 minutes to put this together or so, and so you've got to work smart together and collaborate and communicate with each other and act as a team. Then, at the end, as these bicycles were all done being built, and pretty much hopefully all successfully or close to it, they said, and one more thing, not only are we going to be donating these, but, and then they opened the curtain, and here are the families that are getting them. So then each family, each child came down and met the team who had just built their bicycle, and they got to know each other and learn a little bit about that family's life and where the bike was going and why it was so important. And so when you really talk about what can bring a team together in a shared experience, that's the type of thing that I just think is a great example of, you don't have to put a lot of money into this, you don't have to take everyone to Hawaii. Building a bicycle together and having a very real connection to why this is being done, and having the autonomy and saying, hey, you guys figure out how to best do it. Yes, there's some instructions, and if you want to follow those, great, but stepping away and letting each team develop their own method for getting it done in 20 minutes. And whether they built the bicycle or not correctly, there was no financial reward. There was no, hey, you guys built the best bicycle. They're basically all going to turn out the same if they're done relatively competently. So that's what it is. This is not a $10,000 reward. There's not a let's hold up this shining example of output here. So that's an example of how you could translate some of these dynamics into a team building type of exercise that is meaningful. Thank you for watching today. As I mentioned at the beginning, I specialize in cultural innovation and helping companies develop and elevate their cultures to produce excellence. So if you know of any companies that you think might be able to use these services, or if you have an organization, I also do public speaking. So if you have an organization, a group, or an event that you're looking for a speaker who speaks on culture and interpersonal growth and relationships, and has kind of a sense of humor about it too. I do that and help facilitate workshops as well to build these skills. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will put a link in the comments so that you can schedule a chat with me. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. And remember, be kind to each other out there, for we are all fighting our own battles, having our own struggles day to day, and I will see you next week.